tell her that I think.
Go ahead, say that again.
I was going to say I think that county schools may be on.
Yeah, so we've got middle school and a couple other teachers have joined. So I want to welcome everybody to a PolarConnect event with Emily in Greenland, studying climate change and pollinators in the Arctic. It's Monday, June 16th, 2014. And as we get started, folks have started to understand how the Blackboard Collaborate system works here. But I put up a slide for folks that are on the computer, and so your slides should be changing, and now you see the screen of your screen. And there's some instructions on how to use the presentation mode. So if you'd like to talk, you can click the talk button once, start talking, and then unclick it again when you're done. If you want to interrupt and ask a question, you can actually just type right into the chat box in the bottom left. And you can also raise your hand. There's a little hand icon in the participant list that allows you to ask questions. So if you raise your hand, we'll call on you and let you use your microphone and ask a question live to Emily, and she should be able to hear you off in Greenland. If you're having any sort of technical difficulties, you can email us or type in the chat box if that's possible, and we'll try to get you all set up. So we've talked a little bit to the participants. Another slide here is about participant introductions. So you can type in the chat box who you are, your affiliation, if you're there at a school or you're at home, and where you're from, and then how many people you have with you. That'll be helpful for us to know who the audience is. The next slide talks a little bit about the Polar program that Emily is a part of, and she's going to tell us much more about how she got into PolarTREC. But it is a professional development opportunity for K-12 teachers that are paired with researchers and head up to the Arctic or down to the Antarctic for about 2 to 6 weeks. In the Arctic, it is the summer time for their field season, and the Antarctic folks head down in the U.S. winter time during the school year. So we have a couple of teachers headed down during the school year this winter, and lots more to the Arctic this summer. So the goal is to help share polar science with communities and students, and basically share knowledge and appreciation of the polar regions. Again, if you have questions, you can definitely type them into the chat box. So people are starting to use that and see how it goes. And at the end of the presentation, we could raise hands and you can ask live questions. I'm about to turn it over to Emily, but lots of people are typing into the chat box, Emily, letting us know where they are. So we have Janet, and she is up in Fairbanks. She works for PolarTREC, and she's got her 2 kids listening in. Lucy Coleman, who you know from California, is a PolarTREC teacher, and she's at home. She teaches middle school, and she's headed to Antarctica later this year. We've got Patrick with your whole team of teachers, the middle school science teacher workshop with 17 teachers in the audience. And we have Judy Fonstock, who's also an ARCIS employee, so she's helping out. And we have some of your family along as well. And Judy's off in New Hampshire, she wanted to say. So we got folks from all over the country listening in to you, Emily, and we're really excited to hear from you. So I'm going to go to your first slide that says climate change and pollination. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay, it's yours.
Do I start?
Go right ahead.
Okay, so this picture is a ground-up iceberg. The first day we were really out in the field, we drove to the ice sheet, and we happened to find this big iceberg, and I crawled inside, and that's the story of that. So, and my research project is called Climate Change and Pollination. I'm in Kangerlussuaq. I can't really say it correctly, but you can call it Kanger for short. And I'm the teacher, obviously, and my researcher is Christine. Next slide.
Go ahead.
So how did I come to be here? A lot of people have asked questions because they're like, how did you find this program? So I was actually looking, there's a Steve Spangler cruise. that leaves out of Alaska. And I've always really wanted to do the Sea Spangler cruise, but it's kind of expensive. So I was looking for grants to help pay for it. And as I was looking for grants, I came across PolarTREC, and I completely forgot about Sea Spangler. There's always next year. And I decided I wanted to try for PolarTREC. So I got really excited, I got ready to apply, and then I realized the application wasn't open yet. But eventually it did open, and on the next slide, if you'll change, I'll tell you a little bit more of how that happened.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so at the very beginning of the school year, I applied for PolarTREC. And then in September, I received an email saying I was in the top 45. And I think, you can correct me, Sarah, if I'm wrong, but I think around 200 applied.
Yes, about 200 teachers every year.
So I was in the top 45. And then in November, I was called and told that I had an interview with a researcher. Researchers are given their candidates, and they're allowed to choose 3 people to interview. And in late November, I interviewed. And on December 13th, I found out that Christine had selected me. It also happened to be my wedding day. And then in February, I traveled to Fairbanks, where it was very cold but very neat, for training. And then June, the Sunday after school got out, I left for Greenland. Next slide.
Go ahead.
Okay, so who's with me? There's Christine, and she's the head researcher. She's a PhD student in the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology graduate program at Dartmouth. Her research assistant is Becca, and she recently just graduated a couple of weeks ago, or I guess like a week ago, from Dartmouth with a BA in biology and math. And she's now the research assistant. And then there's Ruth, who's also a Dartmouth graduate, both undergraduate, and she's getting her PhD in earth science. She's not really part of our team, but she's staying at our camp. So we still interact with her a lot. And then there's me. I'm the teacher. Next slide.
All right, we see a picture of your team.
So this is the team. I'm on the, if you're looking at it on the left, next to me is Christine, next to Christine is Ruth, and the next to Ruth is Becca. And we are actually at Trappers. We got stuck in Canada. We flew with the military, and they had to sit down in Goose Bay, Canada, and then they never got the airplane off the ground. It broke. So I spent a night in Canada at the military barracks, which was a first experience. But we went to Trappers for dinner, and Trappers makes you cook your own food. So I ordered a steak, and then I had to cook it. So lots of new experiences. Next slide.
Go ahead.
Okay, so where am I? I'm in Greenland, West Greenland. It has the biggest airport, which is not very big, but it does have the biggest airport in Greenland. It's the farthest inland you can actually reach in Greenland. And if you look at a map, I don't have a map on here, it's not really that far in. So you can reach the ice sheet. As you saw from the picture, it was within walking distance. It has the longest road in Greenland. So this road's very interesting because it's not really paved. There's a lot of sand, dunes, and permafrost is destroying it. And it's used to serve as a test track for car endurance. So you can imagine it's kind of bumpy and a little challenging to drive, but it has character. Kinger also serves as a base for a lot of scientists all over the world. They come to study different topics. And it's pretty diverse. There's muskox, Arctic hare, Caribou, which I've seen several of those. Lots and lots and lots of mosquitoes. I say I probably have about 50 bites on me at the moment. Probably more. Probably more. There's bumblebees. They're very big. There's Arctic foxes. We had some come to our camp. There's lots of birds. And the occasional polar bear. One arrives about every 10 years. And it's usually in bad shape because they're not supposed to be this close. So, next slide.
All right, go ahead. Go ahead, Emily. We're looking at pictures of the road and the airport.
Pictures. So, on the right is the airport, and that's about it. There's usually about one plane. So, and that blue building, which is like a barn, is basically where you get on the plane. And the little building up front are the people that maneuver and tell everyone it's safe to fly. So, biggest airport in Greenland. And then on the left is a picture of the road. You can tell it's sand. This is actually a fairly nice picture. This is before it gets really interesting. But it does show that it's sandy and rocky and not at all like the American road would be. Next.
And Emily, we have a question. Did you mention how long the longest road is?
I am actually researching that. I'm trying to figure out the exact length because it just kind of disappears. So I'm actually going to write a whole article, include it with a video that we are working on about the road. If you want to check on my article in about a week. And then you can know the exact, everything you'd ever want to know about the road, plus our own TV show we're making.
Very cool. All right. And Lucy, that question was from Susan Steiner. She's one of our PolarTREC mentors. You might remember her. And Lucy Coleman, one of your cohort mates, she is curious about how cold it is there at this time of year.
Like I said, today was 64. It seemed a lot warmer because there's no clouds, so the sun is really intense. And it gets down to at night to like 39. But starting tonight, it's supposed to rain some, and it's supposed to get cooler. So like tomorrow's high is, about mid-50s. So it's going to be 10 degrees colder today than yesterday, which means it'll probably be colder at night. So I think it's been fairly nice, but I think it's going to get colder. So usually high 60s up to this point, but it's going to drop.
All right, perfect. Lucy says, thanks for the weather report. And Susan commented, maybe the colder weather will dampen the mosquitoes. And I will go to your next slide here. It's 2 pictures of wildlife. Go ahead.
Okay, so these are just some pictures. That's a caribou. They're very majestic far away. Up close, they kind of are pretty clumsy. But from far away, they look very majestic. And on the right is an Arctic fox. It shed its winter coat, so it's brown. He came really close to our campsite. He comes around. This is the first time I saw him, but I find his tracks everywhere over our campsite. So he comes around frequently. Next.
And I move to the next slide. It's Tundra.
Yes. So the research is occurring in the tundra. In case you don't know what a tundra is, it's kind of like a cold desert. It's a very stark landscape where the soil under the sand is frozen permanently. It's called permafrost. And the top will melt, but deep down it's still frozen. Because the soil's frozen, it's really hard for big plants to grow that have really deep roots because they can't get through the hard ground. So basically you have a lot of shrubs and really small flowers growing in the tundra. So the tundra produces lots of moss, woody plants. and some flowers. Next slide.
All right, and was that Janet joining by phone? Just want to check.
Yeah, that's me.
Okay, great, thanks. And Emily, we are on Tundra, a picture. Pictures.
Go to the pictures. Are you at the pictures?
Yes, pictures.
Okay, so the picture on the right is just a sandstorm as we are driving by in the tundra. Kind of looks like a mini tornado. I thought it was kind of cool. And then on the left is just kind of a generic view you would get driving on the road. We're camped to something similar to that. We have water by us, but you can see there's not a whole lot of green, and there's a lot of woody shrubs and rocks and sand. So next slide.
All right, go ahead. It's on my home.
My home. So where do I live? I live in a tent, and if you know me at all, you know I have a habit of living in tents. It's in the field, which means it's in the sand dunes. It's what you basically saw by that lake. It's fun, even though not the cleanest, it's still fun. This time, it's more like car camping. We have a full kitchen set up with stationary. We have an electric grill and pots and pans. And so even though we're camping, it's more like car camping. We make all of our own food. So that top picture is one of our dinners. And we live in the sand dunes. But also about once a week we stay at KISS, which is a Kangerlussuaq International Science Service. And we do this to shower and charge science instruments. And KISS, basically the bottom floor are all labs. And then the top floor is housing. And I'm going to do a journal entry probably in the next 2 or 3 days just about KISS if you're interested more about that. So if you turn to the next slide, there's some pictures.
Okay.
Okay, so the top left picture, that's a picture of Kanger. Below that is a picture of KISS. It's the building with the red front, and a lot of buildings are like this. They're kind of a rectangle. I don't know if they broaden the buildings or what, but they're all different colors, so it's kind of pretty. You have red and yellow and blue and purple. In the bottom right corner, that's a room at KISS. It's kind of like hostel living. You have a community kitchen. You have a roommate, and it's only one night, so it's okay. And then above that is just a picture of the sand dunes. You can see they're kind of hilly, covered in sand and shrubs. Next.
All right, this slide says why for the environment.
Okay, so why is this project important? So 1/3 of our produce depends on pollinators. So if there's a change in pollination, we want to know because that could affect our food. And 98% of wildflowers depend on pollinators. So if there's any change in pollinators, we may not have any wildflowers. Because of climate change, there could be a change in the type of species or number of pollinators, which will affect plant communities. This happens in the Arctic, but what happens in the Arctic will probably have an impact for what's happening in the United States. The species may shift. Like the next bullet says, a range shift could occur and new species would need to replace the current pollinators. So our pollinators could move out, and we'd have to have some pollinator to replace them. But I don't know if we do. So, and I'm also doing this for public awareness so people can have more science knowledge. So if you go to the next picture.
Okay.
That's just a picture of me. I'm at Joseph Beth Booksellers in Lexington, and I'm just having a little event. I gave like a 10-minute talk, and I have some just demonstrations for people to come and learn a little bit about the Arctic. And I also had an event at Coffee Times Coffee House in Lexington. And if you have any children and you live in Lexington, I'm going to be a story time on July 12th, I think. It's that Saturday at 10 a.m. and I'm going to read some books if you have any children and want to stop by. Next.
Okay.
So why I'm doing this for the classroom. I want to build a relationship with a real researcher. She's in the classroom. She might be able to Skype in, or she may come and visit. She doesn't know this yet, but she seems enthusiastic right now. So we'll say yes. It also brings real-life science in the classroom, and this increases student, or it brings real-life science in the classroom. They see real-life science being done, and it also increases students' knowledge of careers in polar science. They may not realize there's scientists that get to go work in the Arctic and Antarctic. There's scientists that work with polar bears and penguins and all those animals that they're interested in. I'm also doing this to improve my content knowledge in polar science so I can instruct my students better, and it's also improving my science and scientific and engineering practices, which are really important with NGSS. And there's a lot of NGSS opportunities, which I'll get to later. Next.
All right, we're looking at postcards.
Okay, so I did a couple things with my students before I left. One of them is I had them draw on postcards what they thought Greenland looked like. And once I got here, I actually sent it back to them with a my site and a QR code so they could see if their predictions were correct. And also, even if they don't do that, they have official Greenland postage on them. There I am sending them back to them so that they can have something from Greenland. Next slide.
All right.
Okay, so what I'm doing, we're studying how climate change is influencing pollination. We're using the temperature between town and the ice sheet as a temperature gradient to model climate change. So the ice sheet would be like what Greenland's supposed to be like, and then town is going to be as it's slowly warming. Yeah, what they're predicting it's going to be like. And we're studying 3 types of flowers, and there's going to be 9 sites for each flower, with 3 being close to town where it's really warm, 3 being near the ice sheet where it's cool, and 3 between town, which is kind of medium temperature. Next.
And we have a question from your middle school folks. They're wondering how many people live in Kanger?
I believe 700, but I say probably about a quarter of the population are scientists. So probably about a quarter are children. So probably about 450 actual adults. Okay, Christine just pulled up the number. It's actually 512. It's 512, not 700. So.
And is that 512, that's folks who live there year-round?
Yes. So that's 512 year-round.
You're right, a quarter of that in the summer.
Yeah. So then it's about a quarter population growth of scientists in the summer. So.
Awesome. And who's in the background there? Are they going to introduce themselves?
I'm Christine. I'm the researcher. Just letting Emily do her thing.
Hey, Sarah, I have a question for the team.
Go ahead.
All right, so a question for Christine. I'm not looking at the visual. This is Janet. What 3 species of flowers are you looking at, and why did you pick those 3 species of flowers?
So we do have that. She's going to be showing that in a little while, but I chose the species that she is going to present on based on their dependence on pollinators. There are also species that are expected to respond positively to temperatures. And they're really common. Some of them are economically important, like blueberry, or culturally important, like Niviarsiok.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and you might mention this in a second as well, Emily, but Lucy is curious, can you find all 3 species in all 3 zones you're studying?
Yes. Some are a little harder, but yes. Sometimes
all right,
to walk
I'm going to move
into the terrain.
All right, so I put up the picture of the ice sheet.
So the picture of the ice sheet, that's just showing the ice sheet. Pretty neat. So that's why that's there. Next slide. So the 3
All right, we're on flowers.
Okay, so the 3 flowers that we're studying, Salix, which if you look down at the bottom left, is a picture of the old catkin, which is the female part of the plant. The middle picture is a blueberry. They're just little pink flowers, and before they become blue, they'll close up, they'll turn white, and they are referred to by the Inuit by Nanook, which means polar bear. So they're referred to as polar bears before they turn blue. And then the last one is, they call it Niviarsiok. And that's Greenlandic, and it means river beauty or young lady, and that's on the far right. I have a picture now. It blooms. It makes this really pretty purple flower. But it's always found next to moving water on sandy beaches, and it's used in salads here and also tea. So that's kind of a culturally important flower for them. So, next slide.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so when we find our sites, which is what we did the first day. We drove around and hiked some with the GPS and marked them. Now it comes time to set up the site. So here's what we do. We are applying 3 treatments to each plant. So the 3 treatments, they're marked by colored string. The first one is we actually bag the plant so that no pollinators can reach the plant. So we're seeing if pollination is even making a difference in this flower. Is it depending on pollination? The second one, we just mark it with a string, but we don't do anything. This is kind of our control. Pollinators can get to it if they want. And then the third one is supplement. We actually add pollen. And if this is to tell if more pollinators visited the plant, would the plant production produce more fruit? So if more pollinators start moving towards the Arctic, will their plants start thriving? Next slide.
Okay.
Okay, we also collect the abiotic variables, that's non-living variables such as wind speed, temperature, and aspect. That's a picture of me hitting the wind speed. I have a neat little machine. We also determine vegetation coverage, or the type of vegetation in an area, so what other plants are growing around the plants we're studying, and we GPS the location so we can find it. Next.
All right, we're looking at your typical day.
Okay, so your typical day. We wake up at about 7. We leave about 8 because we have to call in to KISS to tell them that we're still alive and we're okay. So they kind of keep a track on us to make sure we're safe. And we are going to try to visit 4 sites a day. We haven't quite got that fast yet, but we're going to visit a couple sites a day. And when we get to a site, first thing we do is we supplement the pollen. So we add pollen to plants. And for each plant, we do this a little different. Probably the hardest is the blueberry. We actually have to take one flower and rip off the petals and kind of shove it inside the other flower. and they're really small. They're very small. So we usually collect about 180 little flowers each. So Christina and I are both collecting 180 little flowers to use on the other flowers we have tagged. And keep in mind, we tagged 15 plants at a site to add pollen, and 15 to not add pollen, and 15 to the bag. So first thing we do is add pollen. Second thing we do is we sit in front of a plot that we determine by laying out a meter, and we just watch the number of pollinators that come to a site. And we use a voice recorder to report anything we see. So if we see a hoverfly come into an area, we may say a hoverfly has landed on a flower, it's walking around the edge, oh, it flew away. And we do this 4 minutes for each plot. And then the last thing we do is we measure flower density. So we just say, we count the number of plants in that little area we're studying. So there might be 79 blueberries. So that's just so we can know how many we're looking at. Next slide. Or next slide.
Great. I'm going to jump back. There's a couple of questions coming in now that you've gotten to the science piece here. Lucy is wondering to the research team, does the research team have a prediction of what results you will find?
Yeah, so there's two possibilities. The first is that temperature may just directly increase fruit and seed production in these plants. Emily, you could have answered this. You know, you could throw the journal entry. So plants may just respond positively to temperature, and pollination may make little difference. Or temperature could increase pollinator activity, and that increased pollinator activity could increase fruit and seed production. But we're thinking that in warm places, so in town, we're going to have more blueberries or more Nibiarchioxes.
All right, and a couple people were commenting, wow, that's a lot of collecting that you have to do. And Susan said, I like that part, watching and recording the number of pollinators. And she asks, are mosquitoes a pollinator there?
Yes, they are. Although I think they're more interested in my blood than the flowers, but they are.
This is Jenna. I have a question about pollinators too.
Go ahead, and then we'll go back to Judy.
Okay. So my question about pollinators is, like, how many different species of pollinators are you finding for these flowers? Are they single pollinators on one particular plant, like specialized, or do they go to all three different types of plants?
Okay, so Emily just reminded me, because I was going to tell you, last year we collected about 21 species of pollinators, but we're grouping that into three kind of groups, like hoverflies, flies, mosquitoes. Emily just reminded me of that. There's also some butterflies. They don't specialize, so as you move up in latitudes, species usually become more and more generalist because the environment is so variable that they're going to they'll survive better if they can be generalists and use the resources that are available.
Thank you.
All right, I think I might have answered Judy's question as well, unless the team wants to say more. Judy was asking, what different kinds of pollinators do you see? So, oh, yes, Judy says that answers my question. And then Lucy just said, thanks for the responses. This is so fascinating. And Susan is laughing at the fact that the mosquitoes are getting you, Emily. And then Susan also just said, that makes sense that they're more generalists. I didn't know that. Cool. So, Emily, I think you want us to be on the slide that says determining pollinator activity. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So this is just towards the end of the project. So I'm not going to be here for the end, but they want to determine the pollinator activity, so how much pollinators are actually coming. So what they're going to do is they're going to actually collect the stigmas and count the pollen grains on the stigma in the lab. And I guess for the ones that they're adding pollen, they'll probably compare that to the ones where they're not. So they'll be able to see how much pollen has been added, if pollinating is making a difference. The second one, I'm doing that right now. You just count pollinators. And the third, we're actually trapping some pollinators on sticky flowers, so we can determine what types are coming. Next.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so at the very end of the project, which I won't be here, the research team is actually going to pick the berries off the blueberry, and they're going to dry them and dissect them later so they can count how many seeds are inside, determine the size, actually see if there's more berries or if the berries have more seeds or if they're bigger closer to town where it's warm. Also, conveniently, the stigmas are still attached to the blueberries, so they don't have to collect the stigma separately. They're also going to determine the percent of flowers that develop berries, because blueberries don't always produce blueberries. They usually have to save up for a couple of years, save their resources up in order to produce them. So it takes a lot of energy. So they have to store it up for several years. They're also going to count the number of berries produced. So that's at the very end before they go home. And then the next slide.
Okay.
It's kind of repeating, but this is how they're going to determine their results, to actually determine if climate change is making a difference in pollination. They're going to count the number of fruits and seeds, like I said. They're hoping to see a difference in the number of fruit produced closer to town where it's warmer. So that's the direct, what they're actually looking for. And kind of the indirect, the side project, is just determining the number of pollinators, if there's more pollinators in the warmer area than colder area. Next slide.
All right, there's some chat going on here online, so let me pass it on to y'all. Susan was saying it's kind of a bummer that you can't eat the blueberries off your own study site, but maybe later in the season you'll find a spare patch of blueberries. And your school folks are asking, what is the temperature difference between the ice sheet and town, kind of the different sites you have, I think?
It's about a 3% difference, which is what they're projecting the Arctic temperatures to rise. So there's about a 3% difference between town and, or 3 degrees, sorry. 3 degree difference from town.
Emily, you still there?
Yes. Hello?
All right, we might have lost Emily. So
Hello?
we'll see if she calls back in a second. Oh, you do hear Emily. Good. Sorry, keep talking.
Sarah, we hear her. Yes, I hear you, Emily. Sarah might be having trouble with her audio at the moment, so I hear you okay.
Okay.
Judy, can you hear Sarah? Can you talk on the microphone and let me know, since I don't see the computer? So, Emily, are you still there?
Yes.
Okay, we might have lost everybody. Oh, wait, we're here. Somebody says we're here. Who's that?
Roseanne Dodson can hear.
Are you on the phone or on the computer?
I'm on the phone.
Okay, I think phone people are okay. Is there anybody in the computer world that can hear us? And if so, press the talk button and open up your mic and let us know.
Hi, this is Judy. Sorry about that. I'm here and we can hear you. Sarah's having a problem on the phone. So she will join.
Okay, thank you, Judy. All right, so go ahead, Emily. Sarah's just having technical difficulties, so and Judy can guide you through the rest of your presentation.
Okay, I was saying there's just a 3%, I was answering a question, a 3% difference between town and 3 degrees difference between town and the ice sheet, which is what they're projecting the Arctic to rise in the next 70 years. Okay, next slide.
All right, this is Sarah. I'm back, and I'll use the computer. We're on your first NGSS slide.
Okay. Are my teacher people still there?
Yep, everybody's still here.
Okay, because this part's kind of the teacher part. So since the next generation standards are coming out, I kind of just applied this real quickly to how it could be used. I just pulled out actually the first standard in the 6th grade map about ecology, and I realized how direct it actually dealt with this project. If you look at the bullets, the first one even says organisms are dependent on their environment and interactions both with other living things and non-living. So the temperature would be non-living and living would be the flowers or the pollinators. So there's second bullet, they're talking about limited resources. There's definitely limited resources up here. So there's lots of competition. And then the third one, growth of organisms and population increases are limited to resources. So the temperature might be a resource, and that would change the population. You go to the next slide.
Okay.
Okay, these are the enduring standards, just things that things that kids need to be able to do besides just the basic standards, like it said. And develop models. They can develop a model using this. They can do it. They can make their own labs, which could be a model. They can analyze and interpret data just like the research team is going to have to. And the third one is they're going to have to construct an explanation based on their data, just like the scientist is going to have to. Next.
All right, and this one starts with cause and effect.
Yeah, this is just a little bit more expanding. We're definitely talking about cause and effect, temperature change, the cause, effect, pollination. We're talking about transfer of energy. The plants have to have so much energy to grow. They have to have the nutrients, and definitely patterns used to identify are more pollinators present, or pollinators coming out earlier, or flowers blooming earlier, just all sorts of patterns. And the next slide.
Engineering practices.
Yep, so a big part of NGSS is engineering, which they use as a term in a very broad sense to mean any engagement in a systematic practice to design to achieve solutions to a particular human problem. So some people view engineering differently, but for NGSS, it's really just about trying to solve a problem. And the framework recommends that students learn to engage in engineering design to solve problems. So they really want students to start solving their own problems. And they do this by asking questions and solving problems. And this makes it more relevant to the student. Next slide.
All right.
Okay, and this is just the final slide about the teaching. This is how I definitely plan on using this, and I can help anyone that wants to use this in their classroom. I'm actually going to make an actual lesson plan and put it on PolarTREC's webpage as well. But I'm going to have my students actually do this, maybe short term or maybe just a couple minutes each day. But they don't have to make it just like mine. I'm going to share this with them. But they can definitely design their own projects based on their own interests. They can determine their own flowers to study. They can ask their own questions. So maybe it's not about how many pollinators are coming to a plant. Maybe they're curious as to why some plants are receiving more pollinators, or are certain pollinators going to a certain plant. So they can definitely ask their own questions and set up their design to solve that. So depending on what they're studying, it's all going to be slightly different. And then I plan on having them collect data, maybe probably an extended time, like 2 weeks, but only spending like 10 minutes a day of going outside and collecting data. Then they'll come in and put it in their chart. And then at the very end, I'm going to have them graph, or however they're going to determine the results, and they're going to have to give me an answer, which is reflect, or determine their results. And then just like the standards, I want them to reflect on how this could be improved for the future. So, and the best part about all of this is we're going to be learning about ecology through the whole process, just like the standards I shared with you before. So next slide. That was just sources.
Yep, we're on your sources.
Yep. Okay, so that's all. The last slide is next.
Perfect, Emily. Thanks so much. And Susan Steiner just mentioned, yes, this is very doable. Thanks, Emily. So we do have some time for questions if anybody wants to ask any more questions in the chat box, or to use their microphone to chat. So you can ask Emily a question live. So you'd be able to do that. You could put your hand up, kind of tap on that hand button that'll show that you'd like to ask a question live. And we'll call on people as we go through. So it looks like, Judy, do you have a question, or are you just doing an example there?
I have a question for Emily. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Emily, I read your first journal entry, and you were talking about going out to look for bumblebees. I'm curious whether they're natural bumblebees, or whether they're like bumblebees that are originally from Greenland, or you mentioned that there were bees that were being imported. And I wondered then whether those are bumblebees or honeybees. Thanks.
The bumblebees are actually, they're supposed to be in Greenland. They're native, and there's 2 species of bumblebees. The honeybees are imported. They're the imported species.
If I can follow up with that, you had mentioned parasites. So are you talking about parasites then that come in on the honeybees that are imported?
Yes, there's, they don't know for sure. There's not really any data, which is what Christine's studying. She's kind of going to be the first person on it. But there might be a chance the honeybees are bringing in parasites, maybe. And then the honeybees are flying around and then giving it to the bumblebees. So we actually, or Christine actually caught the first bumblebee yesterday, and it had to die in the name of science. But she caught the first one. They're really big, by the way, really big, like the size of your thumb. And she's going to take it back. She's going to freeze it and dissect it to see if it actually has a parasite inside. So the honeybees are non-native, and they think maybe that they may bring parasites to the native bumblebees.
Great, thanks, Emily.
All right, and Susan said you'll need to post a picture of a native bumblebee for us in an upcoming journal, hopefully. Are you going to do a journal about bees?
I will do a journal about bees. I have several special topics planned.
Very cool. Susan says, awesome, great. Any folks from FCPS want to ask any questions live? They might be talking to each other about what they might want to ask. We'll give them a second.
Right.
All right, so SCPSC, got a question there. Go ahead and press the talk button down to speak, and then press it again when you're done, when I'm done talking. So I'll let you have the mic.
We're not hearing you. Oh. Are you holding it in, or are you just clicking it? I've already messed up now. Can you hear us? I did that the first time. It didn't work.
I heard laugh.
Okay, our question is, do you think it could be a virus rather than a parasite?
Christine said she definitely thinks they could bring in viruses as well. But she's just testing the parasites. But viruses are a possibility.
Great, thanks.
It looks like Lucy had a question in the chat box. Lucy, do you want to ask that question live, or do you want me to just repeat it? All right, so I'll repeat this question for Lucy. It was, I wonder how long the research team will be in the field collecting data. It seems like it'd take a while to get to the fruiting stage.
They're going to be here until the end of August. And as I leave, actually more people are going to arrive. They'll be here, I guess, around 3 months.
Great, thanks. And Judy, you want to ask a question?
I do. I find this study so interesting, Emily. I have so many questions. But my next question is, and you may have mentioned it and I missed it, is the blueberry that is growing in Greenland, is that a species that's specific for Greenland, or is it found in other tundra areas around the Arctic?
Yeah, it's found all over the Arctic, and it's even found in alpine areas in the U.S.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Judy, while you have the microphone, do you want to ask another question? Did you have a few more?
Well, I guess, so I used to be a beekeeper, and so I'm especially curious about the bees and the bumblebees and the imported bees. And I guess I'm wondering whether you've looked at the people in Greenland. Are there a number of people that actually are beekeepers there that are importing honeybees, where the mites and parasites can come from? Is there a big population of beekeepers there?
It's not really big. It's kind of a growing. Yeah, it's experimental kind of growing. They've been trying to do this, so I've heard, and the bee populations keep dying out. But last year they survived. So last year is kind of the first year they survived, but all the other years they've died during the cold. But this is all going on in southern Greenland, and we're more on western. So it's not really caught on here, but it's definitely a growing trend in the south if they can figure out how to keep them alive.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, we're doing great on time, so if we have any more questions, raise your hand and we can ask them live or put them in the chat box. We'll just see if anybody has a few more questions before we log off. Emily, what are you doing what time is it there in Greenland?
It's 6:45.
All right.
Dinner after this, but we don't know what.
Yeah, just about ending your day. Perfect. Well, the middle school folks back at home said they think they're good. Thanks for time for questions. I'm going to run through just our last slides here to say thanks so much to Emily and the team for the event. I'll archive this event soon and get the link out to all the folks that registered, so you'll be able to check back and listen again or share it with other teachers. And a slide here about teachers joining PolarTREC. You can follow expeditions, join these kinds of events. We have a few more coming up. Actually pretty soon we have an event from Tundra Field Station on the 27th of June and one again on July 2nd from Tundra Field Station, which both those are up here in Alaska. And you can look for upcoming events at the PolarTREC website, and Emily is going to be putting out many more journals. They've been great so far. So thanks, Emily. Thanks to the team, and folks in the chat box are saying thanks for the wonderful and informative event. I feel like I learned a lot. And what I'll do at the moment is I'll end the recording here.